Speaker, in Germany, we're seeing lockdowns over the Easter holidays. France, Paris is entering a third wave lockdown, including 21 million people. Italy, another Easter lockdown. Greece, currently closing schools, extending those closures. Czech Republic, one of the hardest hit countries in the EU.
I have to interrupt the honourable member. You will have the honourable parliamentary secretary will have 3 minutes remaining in the debate and 5 minutes of questions and comments after oral questions. Statements by members. The honourable member for Spadina, Fort York.
He needs to put his microphone.
The honourable member has to lower the microphone.
Lower the boom. Thank you. A little over 20 weeks ago, our government announced the Rapid Housing Initiative, a $1 billion investment aimed at not just protecting people in precarious shelter from COVID, but it was also accompanied by a bold commitment to end chronic homelessness in the throne speech. I'm as proud and quite frankly as amazed at how the program has achieved its stated goals. The plan was to create 3,000 units of housing by working directly with municipalities and frontline housing providers. And by working with the cities, we move fast, but by working with housing providers, we also managed to make the dollars work deeper. Over 4,777 units of housing were created and acquired. Almost 2/3 of the projects in the project stream will fund Indigenous-led housing programs. And because many of these units will house families and children, the actual number of people housed will be well clear of 5,000 people. When added to the now $70 billion national housing strategy, it's clear. Ending homelessness is within reach. Our government knows there's more to do, but we also know what works. And the good news is there's more good news on the way. Thank you.
The honourable member for Flamborough-Glanbrook.
Speaker, failure to close the borders early, eliminating the pandemic planning infrastructure, and the lack of a true national pandemic response with all provinces and parties caused more casualties than what was necessary in this COVID pandemic. Now, severe government restrictions have caused such a rationing of healthcare that 250,000 urgent surgeries have been delayed. 60% of Canadians report minor to major mental health issues due to lockdowns. And one oncologist reports that we have a tsunami of cancer coming with screenings and early diagnosis at dangerous lows. At a Hamilton hospital, youth suicide attempts are up threefold. Thousands of people have died alone, and families were not able to have a proper funeral for closure. Speaker, added to this, tens of thousands of small businesses and families they support who have experienced financial ruin due to unreasonable restrictions that unfairly affect single moms, our youth, and hourly workers. People know how to social distance, wear a mask when needed, and sanitize their hands and surfaces. Governments need to trust citizens and entrepreneurs to be safe, vastly reduce restrictions like the Ontario Green Model, and let people have a semblance of normal after a year of COVID sacrifice.
The honourable member for Pickering-Uxbridge.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak of the troubling reports of human rights abuses in Sri Lanka. Tamils in Canada and around the world have been fighting for justice and accountability for the gross violations of past and ongoing human rights violations in Sri Lanka. I've also met recently with Muslim members of my community who were horrified and deeply concerned with the recent government policy in Sri Lanka for forced cremations that denied Muslim and other religious minority groups their basic burial rights. I'm pleased to see the Human Rights Council Resolution 46-1 passed today, calling for increased international accountability and monitoring of human rights violations in Sri Lanka. Canada must continue to stand strongly against these human rights violations and always support measures that promote peace, progress, and reconciliation. Today's resolution is an important step towards the furthering accountability. We must speak up and stand for justice and accountability and call an end to further gross human rights violations in Sri Lanka. Our government will always stand up for human rights both here at home and abroad. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The
Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Saturday was the International Day of the Francophonie. On that opportunity, I want to take this opportunity to highlight the importance of cooperation and friendship, bringing together Quebec and other Francophone nations around the planet. Every March 20th is 300 million Francophones celebrating the solidarity that brings them together under the International Organization of the Francophonie. This is one of the only international organizations where Quebec is treated as a full partner, as a full nation. It makes me proud, Mr. Speaker, because this is a unique opportunity to draw a connection between Quebec's political aspirations and its ability to assume an international role. Every day here in North America, speaking and sharing French is an act of resistance and self-determination. To paraphrase Pierre Bourgault, when you speak French in this parliament, sometimes stubbornly, sometimes through principle, you're defending your language, but we're also defending all the languages in the world against the hegemony of only one language. The honourable member for Louis Hébert. Mr. Speaker, every day on average 4 Canadians die due to an impaired driver. This means that every year impaired driving is the main criminal cause of death and injury in Canada. The 3rd week of March is the National Impaired Driving Prevention Awareness Week. And it runs from the 21st to the 27th of March this year. It's an opportunity to make other people around us aware of the importance that when you drink a glass or you smoke a joint, that you should never drive, that when you're tired, that you should stop driving. This week is a way of reminding people that when they drive, they must drive sober all year round. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Chilliwack Hope.
It's been a year since governments in Canada and around the world locked down their citizens in order to fight the COVID-19 virus. While they were accepted as being necessary at first, Canadians want to know the plan to bring these lockdowns to an end. 1 million Canadians have lost their jobs and the dignity that comes with them. Seniors are locked away from the people they love. Extended families remain separated. Overdoses and mental illnesses are skyrocketing, and the impact of these lockdowns on our children will take decades to address. Delays in diagnostics and treatments for serious illnesses continue to have deadly impacts. And while you can watch hockey at the bar and shop in the hundreds in big box stores, faith communities are prevented from meeting together, their buildings empty. Our physical, mental, spiritual, and economic health has suffered long enough. It's time for this government to deliver a real plan to get us out of these lockdowns, because we just aren't meant to live this way.
The
honourable member for Orléans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The pleasure of hosting a virtual meeting with the Orleans Youth Council alongside my provincial counterpart, MPP Stephen Blais, to discuss our youth environmental priorities with our special guest, Minister Jonathan Wilkinson. As climate change has long been among the most important issues raised by our Youth Council, their questions on pollution, emissions, and carbon neutrality contributed to an exciting conversation. I want to thank the outstanding members of the Orleans Youth Council for their advocacy on the environment, and Minister Wilkinson for taking the time to join us. Et finalement, Monsieur le Président.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the month of the Francophonie, I want to highlight the fact that we celebrated the International Day of the Francophonie on March 20th. To all the dear Francophones and Francophiles, thank you for cherishing, protecting, and speaking French. Thank you. I would like to remind members that when you refer to anyone in the House, you use their title or their riding name, but not their name. It's something that I would like to remind all members to do.
Newmarket, Aurora.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was proud to support my community in Newmarket, Aurora in the coldest night of the year fundraising walk. This year, they doubled their goal and raised over $86,000 to help In From the Cold, a local charity that assists homelessness and at-risk individuals by providing shelter, training, and transition to more permanent solutions. I'd like to congratulate these walkers, volunteers, sponsors, and charities in Newmarket, Aurora for making this year's coldest night of the year such a great success, and thank them for their continuous commitment to help vulnerable members of our community. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to recognize that Canadians across 145 communities participated in this annual walk and that a total of $6 million was raised. Congratulations to my colleagues in the House who participated in the walk and in their own communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Charlesbourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, this morning at the starting of today's sitting, I made an important parliamentary gesture. I acted as a legislator, but also as father of 2 children. I tabled Bill C-277 to stop the sexual exploitation of minors. This bill implements the recommendations of the Special Commission on Sexual Exploitation of Minors, a report that was passed unanimously by the National Assembly of Quebec. My parliamentary initiative will, I hope, help protect our children against sexual exploitation. Now, I hope that the Liberal government will make it a priority. Our children should not become statistics. The Special Commission's report should not be shelved or forgotten. I would invite all members of all stripes to support this bill. It crosses party lines and help me implement the provisions. Our children are what is most precious to us all.
Honourable member for Don Valley West.
Mr. Speaker, more than 6,500 companies responded to the government's call to action to mobilize against COVID-19, including 2 companies in Don Valley West.
Technologies Inc.
Secure Key Technologies Inc. created a secure digital ID verification software. It's used above all for online banking transactions. It's also used for digital government services like My CRA, ensuring that Canadians can have secure access to virtual services.
Local brewery, Amsterdam, is also a COVID-19 hero. During the pandemic, they converted surplus beer-making capacity to make hand sanitizer, donating it to hospitals, including our own Sunnybrook. A big thank you to these 2 companies and all the companies that have stepped up over the last year to protect Canadians. Made in Canada, we are in this together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, child sexual abuse devastates individuals, families, and communities. Survivors deserve accessible, safe, comprehensive physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual support. Offenders must face real consequences for the severity of their harm. That's why Conservatives prioritize compassion for victims and take action against dangerous criminals. Conservatives brought in tougher penalties for child predators and strengthened the National Sex Offender Registry and DNA Bank. Conservatives fight against human trafficking, online child sexual exploitation, and join more than 100 victims who want an investigation into MindGeek for child sexual abuse material. Little Warriors is a national charity founded by Glory Meldrum for the awareness, prevention, and treatment of child sexual abuse, funded mainly by private donors and grants. The Be Brave Ranch is a one-of-a-kind, specialized, trauma-informed, evidence-based, groundbreaking treatment center. I want to recognize the crucial work of the Little Warriors team and the contributions of all the volunteers and donors, because every victim and every child matters.
The honourable member for Lethbridge.
After 3 decades investigations into the Prime Minister's behaviour, a $500 million sole source deal with his friends at We Charity, replacing Parliament with a committee where only specific questions are allowed to be asked, and a record number of cover-ups, filibusters, and tactics to delay this place, the trust that Canadians has put in this government is beginning to wane. The Liberals may think highly of themselves, but ultimately they are accountable to Canadians. The Prime Minister likes to talk a lot about his values of openness and transparency. Remember the phrase, sunny ways. Unfortunately, however, his actions have not reflected his words. We, on the other hand, on this side of the House, are committed to taking real action. Canada's Conservatives will put the country first by enacting the toughest accountability and transparency laws that Canada has ever seen. We will toughen the Conflict of Interest Act and impose higher penalties. We will toughen the Lobbying Act to end abuse by Liberal insiders. And we will increase transparency in order to end the cover-ups. It is time for action. It is time to restore trust. It is time to serve Canadians.
The honourable member for Nunavut.
Mr. Speaker, the Baffin Land Mining Corporation is looking to double the size of the Mary River mine. Last month, land guardians braved temperatures as low as -36 for days to have their voices heard to defend Nunavut from environmental and cultural harm. Since the mine's construction, we have heard an overwhelming amount of community concern. One hunter reminded us of something really important. He said, "This is our land, our home, being destroyed, and we have to think about our future for our children. I want to make my position clear, Mr. Speaker. This expansion is a threat to my people, to Indigenous sovereignty, and to our environment. This government has been largely silent on this dangerous project. Because of this, I will be hosting a telephone town hall tomorrow night at 7 p.m. EST. Nunavut, when you get a phone call to invite you to the town hall, please join me to raise your concerns and let's fight for your rights. Matna.
The Honourable Member for Beloeil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, being in politics is a calling, and sometimes it's even one's life's work. It's a desire to effect change, and even, I would say, to improve the lives for one's fellow citizens. In Quebec, this is also expressed in the fight for the nation. An extraordinary example of political commitment is Carol Lévesque, political attaché, communications director, chief of staff, the member for Saint-Hubert, Saint-Bruno for 3 terms, president of the Marie-Victorin School Board. She has always been a staunch fighter. She has done everything in terms of political commitment. She has a finely tuned mind, a devastating comebacks, a great gift. She is an extraordinary politician. As the Bloc's critic in heritage, she brought the cultural sector together in her fight to respect copyright, and she won. Today, Carol is in palliative care. Her partner remains close by her side. Perhaps she is in her final days. On behalf of the Bloc, and no doubt on behalf of thousands of Quebecers, and in my personal name, I want to say to her, thank you for your work. Thank you for being in our lives. We are all with you.
The Honourable Member for Caribou Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, this last year has only worsened Canada's pre-existing mental health crisis. Sadly, as this crisis worsens by the day, the Liberal government shamefully continues to ignore it. Canadians who have hit their breaking point have been put on hold when they reach out for help because this Liberal government has failed to prioritize a national 3-digit suicide prevention hotline. Canadians struggling with mental illness, mental injury, anxiety, or depression, they don't need another free government website. Mr. Speaker, through their MAID legislation, the Liberals have all but given up on struggling Canadians. What a disgrace. We should be helping our most vulnerable live, not only survive, but thrive. Mental health is health, and mental health must be treated and funded properly. An elected Conservative government will boost funding to the provinces for health care. We will incentivize employers to provide mental health coverage to employees, and we will get 988 implemented. The Liberals have no plan, but Conservatives do, and we will act and secure Canadians' mental health care.
The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. Mr. Speaker, I want to pay tribute to the contribution of an extraordinary man, Mr. Roland Barbier. Roland worked for the Hochelaga Community Centre for over 20 years. Every day he fought against stigmatization of poverty and to give dignity to those who are marginalized. He mobilized people for the Operation Minus Zero, a unique initiative that distributes warm clothes to children across Hochelaga throughout Quebec. He helped a family find housing and food. His love for people is catching, and he's an inspiration. Roland, thank you for your passion, your dedication, your boundless generosity, and everything you do for the neighborhood. Happy retirement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, for a year, Canadians across the country have been in various stages of lockdown. Opioid overdoses are up. Canadians are feeling increasing strain on their mental health. They deserve a serious, data-driven, safe plan for reopening. How long will the Prime Minister keep those Canadians waiting?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way during this pandemic, this government has been there for Canadians. We were there for families, we were there for workers, we were there for small businesses, we were there for provinces right across the country, and we will continue to be. With tens of billions of dollars transferred to the provinces, support directly for Canadians, all the while grounding ourselves in the best recommendations of science and experts. That's what we will continue to do. We're all looking forward to a better summer, Mr. Speaker, but to get there, we have to work together to make sure we're pushing back on those variants, getting everyone vaccines, and keeping healthy.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, tens of thousands of Canadian small businesses are hanging on by a thread. Lockdowns are hurting main streets across the country, and family-owned businesses are in crisis. This has had an impact on the country's physical and mental health. The Prime Minister needs to commit to a data-driven, safe plan for reopening to give millions of Canadians hope. Where is the plan and when is it coming?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way we have been there to support Canadians, and every step of the way we will continue to put both the protection and safety of Canadians and the benefits of our economy at the front line. That's why we are deeply informed by experts and scientists in how we move forward. We will continue to ground our decisions based in science and evidence. Unlike the Conservative Party that continues to doubt the use of masks from time to time, we will continue to stand up for Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the government's chief scientist doesn't agree with the Prime Minister's political decision to delay second doses, so he doesn't follow his own edicts here in the House. Taiwan has a plan for rapid tests and has been open. The United States and the United Kingdom both have fully published their plans for a safe and effective reopening. Why not in Canada? This Prime Minister has been slow on the border, slow on rapid tests, behind the entire developed world on vaccines. Why are we also going to fail on the economic reopening?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning, we knew that the best way to ensure that our economy would come roaring back is to be there sufficiently to support Canadians, small businesses, workers, families, seniors, youth through this crisis. That's exactly what we've done. And every step of the way, we have deferred to scientists and experts. We also respect the provinces that make their own determinations around spacing of intervals of doses. We will be there to support them every step of the way. Mr. Speaker, Canadians have a government that is there for them. We will continue to be there for them.
The Honourable Member of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président, depuis un an.
Mr. Speaker, for a year, our country has been under lockdown. Canadians are suffering. Pressure on mental health is increasing sharply. Domestic violence is increasing. No plan for rapid testing or for mass vaccination campaigns. That means there's no hope. When will the Liberal government decide to have a plan for a safe reopening for Canada? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The Conservatives in this place often say that the government has not acted when it comes to rapid testing. On the contrary, for months and months, we have sent millions, dozens of millions of rapid testing kits to provinces and territories, to the private sector, even to individuals. We will continue to be there to give access for provinces and territories and individuals to every means available, and we work to protect our citizens while spring arrives. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, many countries have plans for their economy to reopen. Taiwan has rapid testing, the United States and the UK have reopening plans for their economies. In Canada, we have nothing. We're still waiting. We're trailing behind, and we are tired of waiting for everything. Will the Liberal government present a plan to Canadians for a safe reopening of the economy? If yes, when? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, at every step, we are not only getting ready to produce a plan, we are implementing a plan every step of the way. We are working hand in hand with provinces and territories, but the leader of the opposition wants to talk about plans for the economy. Unfortunately, what we saw this last weekend is that he still does not understand that we can't have a plan for the economy if we don't have a plan to fight climate change. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if hand in hand is a little exaggerated, but spring has led to some delightful surprises, including collaboration between the federal government and Quebec. 500 million for high-speed internet in Quebec's regions, transferred to Quebec, which will get that set up before 2022. My goodness, that was in the Bloc's program in 2019, and we are pleased to see it. Now, this delightful and budding openness apply to health transfers that have been unanimously requested by the Quebec National Assembly and every premier in Quebec and Canada, the Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, from the beginning of the pandemic, we've been working hand in hand with the provinces on investments and expenditures that are necessary to get through the pandemic. Billions of dollars have been transferred to provinces and territories to help with dealing with the pressure on our healthcare system. We will continue to be there to work with provinces to help Canadians throughout the country. At the same time, once the pandemic is over, we will have discussions on how to increase health transfers to make sure that Canadians are well served in the years to come as well. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Logically, Mr. Speaker, it's not after the pandemic that we need more money for health. It is during the pandemic. However, let's trust in the coming spring. Premier Legault, who was treated as a white supremacist, we denounced Quebec bashing. That's great. And now what? What gesture do we make to make that real? How do we affirm the message to all of Canada that Quebecers are not more racist than anyone else, including the Prime Minister of Canada, the Right Honourable Prime Minister? Mr. Speaker, I want to come back to what my honourable colleague said at the beginning of his question, which is, now is the time to transfer money to the provinces for their healthcare systems, not the future, because we are in a pandemic now. And that's what we've been saying from the beginning, and that's what we have been doing from the beginning. We've transferred dozens of billions of dollars to help Quebecers, Canadians get through the challenges to our healthcare system. We will all be there for Quebecers and Canadians now and in the years to come. That is a promise. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Après avoir su qu'il y avait des plaintes inconduites.
After becoming aware that there were complaints of sexual misconduct against the Chief of the Defence Staff, the Prime Minister not only increased his salary, he renewed his contract. That sends a clear message to women in the Canadian forces that they are not safe and that they are not taken seriously. Will the Prime Minister apologize and prevent such a situation from recurring? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as the government, we take all allegations seriously. We've relied on appropriate independent authorities, and that is what's happening here. After the Ombudsman reported concerns to the Minister of Defence, the Minister then communicated with independent authorities whose responsibility is to follow up on such allegations. It's not up to politicians to make those decisions and make investigations. It's up to the independent authorities to do so, and that's exactly what happened in this case.
Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Real leadership is about finding solutions, not looking for excuses. If, as a nation, we took the approach of this Liberal government, looking for excuses, then we would have never had universal health care. We know this pandemic has disproportionately impacted seniors. They were the hardest hit, particularly in long-term care, and we know that for-profit long-term care have the worst conditions. So will the Prime Minister show leadership and support our new Democratic Opposition Day motion to remove profit from long-term care so that our seniors are cared for with respect and dignity?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, all Canadians in this House and across the country can agree we need to make sure our seniors are getting the care and treatment and dignity that they so richly deserve. And that is something that we are committed to working with the provinces and territories on. Unlike the NDP, we understand and respect the Constitution of Canada that designates certain areas of jurisdiction as being provincial authority, but we will work hand in hand with the provinces and territories to ensure that right across the country, all seniors get the top quality of care. It's something we all want. It's something we're going to work together in partnership to deliver.
The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, a year of lockdowns has had devastating mental health effects on Canadians. Too many have said their final goodbyes to a parent or a grandparent through a window or not at all. We've missed too many funerals and too many weddings. But 2 weeks ago, the Centers for Disease Control said that vaccinated grandparents in the U.S. can spend time with their grandchildren. Here in Canada, grandparents are looking for some hope too. Will grandparents in Canada who have been vaccinated get to see their grandchildren?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way, Canada's response has been guided by science and evidence and has been done in partnership and collaboration with provinces and territories. The member of the opposition knows that it's provinces and territories that set the public health guidelines, indeed, in fact, local public health officials that work to protect all Canadians in their jurisdiction. We've been there for Canadians, and the provinces and territories will continue to be there for them.
The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Well, the federal government is abdicating its responsibility by refusing to make recommendations on this, Mr. Speaker, and they need to acknowledge that. For many Canadians, spiritual and mental health are linked. Gathering with people of the same faith and belief has been vital to freedom of worship and good mental health. With suicides and overdoses increasing, people have fewer places to go for help. For most of the last year, more Canadians could go to Costco than to their temple or their church. So, Mr. Speaker, will vaccinated Canadians be able to attend their church, synagogue, or temple? And we are asking the federal government for direction on this, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, again, the member opposite knows that those decisions around public health measures are related to the public health leadership in that jurisdiction, whether it be provincial, territorial, or local. And we want to thank all the hardworking healthcare professionals that are protecting all of us during this very difficult time. It is encouraging, though, to hear the member of the opposition talk about harm resulting from overdoses. And I certainly hope it reflects a change in stance by the Conservative Party in their opposition to compassionate harm reduction care.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, last week at FINA, I asked Philip Cross, who was the chief economic analyst at Stats Canada for years, if he saw anything in Bill C-14 or the fall statement that would give him comfort that there's an actual plan of growing our way out of this crisis we're in today. His answer, flat out no. After 422 days of small businesses shut down and sector collapses, can this government tell us today what their plan is for economic recovery?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome that question because it gives me an opportunity to share some good economic news with this House. Last week, the ratings agency DBRS Morningstar reaffirmed Canada's AAA rating and wrote as follows. Canada's AAA ratings are underpinned by the country's considerable fundamental strengths, including its sound macroeconomic policy frameworks, large and diverse economy, and strong governing institutions. Thank you to Canadians for working so hard to get through this global pandemic.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about underpinning. The Parliamentary Budget Officer said himself, I haven't seen anything yet, at least from the government, on recent measures. When questioned if this government has any outcome-based analysis when allocating government spending. No metrics on productivity, growth rates, or spending efficiency. If they are not leading their decisions on economic recovery through traditional metrics, can this government explain exactly what type of tea leaves or crystal balls they are consulting when determining their spending allocation?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, When the chips were down, our government was there for Canadians, and the results show it. Last week, the IMF published estimates showing that without our government's economic response, real output would have declined by an additional 7.8 percentage points last year, and the unemployment rate would have been 3.2% higher. Our government stood by Canadians, and as a result of that support and the resilience of Canadians, the IMF projects our GDP will grow this year by 4.4%.
Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Health was asked yesterday by myself if fully vaccinated seniors can hug their grandchildren. Today, my colleague, the Deputy Leader, just asked her a very similar question, and she said that it was the province's jurisdiction to make that determination. So I'm wondering if she and her department is planning on issuing any guidance on what vaccinated Canadians will or will not be able to do.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'll just remind the member opposite that, unlike the party opposite, we do believe in science and evidence, including the evidence that climate change is real. I will also remind the opposite member that it is, in fact, work with provinces and territories that results in national guidance. The guidance that has been developed with all provinces and territories is posted on our website, and I encourage all Canadians to check it out.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Well, at a time when we should all be working together to encourage Canadians with regard to vaccine uptake, the federal health minister should be starting to tell Canadian public what she and her department is doing with regard to setting benchmarks on advice for what vaccinated Canadians can and can't do. So again, I'm just going to ask her, because she didn't give an answer. Is she planning on issuing, on the advice of her department, any guidance on what vaccinated Canadians can or can't do, or is she planning on completely abdicating this to the provincial governments?
Honourable Minister.
Well, since the member opposite is talking about vaccine hesitation, I will say this. What I am confident in is the safety of the vaccines that have been approved by Health Canada to save people's lives. And so it's really important that Canadians accept vaccination when it's their turn and that they talk to their healthcare provider if they have any questions. We know that without a doubt, vaccination is saving lives, and we will continue to be there for provinces and territories as they deliver those vaccinations in arms.
L'honorable député de Montarville.
The Honourable Member for Montarville. Quebec and the provinces are calling for an increase in health transfers, in particular to fight the pandemic. Above all, it is because health costs are constantly increasing, while the federal government's financial share is decreasing, which is leading Quebec and the provinces into debt. Yesterday, in an internal document obtained by La Presse, the Deputy Minister of Employment said that the trajectory of the province's net debt is unsustainable. This confirms that Quebec and the provinces are telling the truth, and the federal government knows it, so why does it refuse to increase health transfers? The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the Prime Minister has been very clear. We've been there for provinces and territories throughout this pandemic, whether it's through billions of dollars in support, direct financial support, purchasing of personal protective equipment, providing additional personnel to help prevent and support people experiencing tremendous outbreaks in their regions, ensuring that we have access to vaccination, paying for all that vaccination. And we will continue to be there for provinces, including Quebec and Quebecers, throughout this pandemic and beyond.
L'honorable député de Montarville.
The Honourable Member for Montarville. What the Minister has revealed is that the government is well aware that despite the deficit resulting from the pandemic, it will have the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio in the G7, while Quebec and the provinces are going to debt because of skyrocketing healthcare costs. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has already established this, so has the Conference Board, the Council of the Federation, the Quebec National Assembly. Today, we have confirmation that the government knows that these people are right, and yet it chooses to continue to starve the healthcare system by refusing to increase transfers. Why? The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, malgré ce que...
Mr. Speaker, in spite of what my colleague is saying, the government of Canada is working with the government of Quebec. We've been there in terms of healthcare. We've been there from the beginning of the pandemic, sending PPE and vaccines, and we will continue to collaborate and discuss with the Government of Quebec in the future. We will always be there for Quebec.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
When it came to light that the Prime Minister approved a $500 million grant to a group that had paid his family $500,000, he said, listen, this thing was just dropped on the cabinet table and I knew nothing about it. Is it really believable that this Prime Minister would know nothing about a $500 million cabinet submission? Well, actually, yes, it is. But until you see this email that was sent to his top advisor from Craig Kielburger. Hi, Ben. Thank you for your kindness in helping to shape our latest program with the government. What role did the Prime Minister's top advisor play in setting up this $500 million handout to the Prime Minister's friends?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as has been shared on numerous occasions, the nonpartisan public service recommended that this was the only organization that could deliver the Canada Student Service Grant in the time and capacity that was required. Obviously, the program did not unfold as we intended, and all of the money that was allocated to the organization has been...
Just going to interrupt. The microphone is not picking up well. If I can have the Honourable Minister maybe just start over.
Is that better, Mr. Speaker?
Much better. Please proceed.
Excellent. Mr. Speaker, as has been shared, the nonpartisan public service recommended that this was the only organization that could deliver this program in the timeline in the degree that was required to respond to student and youth needs. And unfortunately, the program did not unfold as it was intended. All of the money that was allocated for this program has been returned, and our government remains focused on youth and students in responding to their needs. It's unfortunate the Conservative Party actually has been delaying Bill C-14, which actually will provide interest relief to student programs. So I'm pleased to see their interest in supporting youth and students, and I hope we can continue providing programs to Canadians.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, she says the program didn't unfold as intended. Well, that's because they got caught when they were intending to hand money over to their friends. But there they go again, blaming the nonpartisan public service for the program, except for this little email from Craig Kielburger, who says, hello, Ben, senior advisor to the Prime Minister. Thank you for your kindness in helping to shape our latest program with the government. If these ministers can't give us a straight answer about what role the PMO played in shaping the program, will they let this senior advisor come testify at a parliamentary committee under oath to explain his story?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my colleagues knows well that we believe strongly in the work of committees. They have a responsibility to examine legislation, make it better, ask questions, and that's why we never turn away from having our ministers appear at committees. And we did so without any hesitation many, many times, and we'll continue doing it. That's how it works, Mr. Speaker. Our ministers are accountable to this part of Parliament. The ministers, Mr. Speaker.
Member, l'honorable député de Charbot-Haute-Saint.
The Honourable Member for Charbot-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister approved a $50,000 bonus and pay raise to the former Chief of the Defence Staff even after serious allegations of sexual misconduct against him came to light in 2018. Women serving in our armed forces must surely be baffled after learning of this decision. What message does this send to women serving in the Canadian Forces? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we take all allegations of misconduct extremely seriously. And as I stated before, I do not determine the pay increases. That is done by independently based on the advice and the recommendation of the public service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Charbot.
The Honourable Member for Charbot-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, we're used to the response from the Prime Minister sending the problem to somebody else, saying it's not my responsibility, it's other people. But now I'll ask the Minister of Defence to go back in time, to remember his time in uniform, and would he say the same thing to his women colleagues? Is that the same answer he would give them? Yes or no? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure when the member served that he served honorably as well, and I did the same thing. And we take our responsibility very seriously, the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces, and that's exactly what we're doing. We have absolutely we have zero tolerance for any type of misconduct. We take every allegation extremely seriously, and that's exactly what we did in this situation here as well, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member for North Island Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, the RCMP Civilian Review and Complaints Commission determined Colton Bushy's mom was discriminated against when officers told her of her son's death. According to the report, police told her to get it together, then asked her if she was drinking and even smelled her breath. This was said to a mom who had just lost her son violently. Imagine her pain. Reconciliation grows from recognizing uncomfortable truths, not symbolic gestures. When will this Prime Minister stop talking and start acting to end systemic racism in policing?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And this is an important question, and certainly our condolences and sympathy goes to the Bushy family, and the way in which they were treated is unacceptable. We thank the CRCC for their report. But I would remind the member that we have made a clear declaration of moving forward on enhanced civilian oversight for all law enforcement agencies, including the RCMP. We're working towards modernizing the training for police and law enforcement, addressing standards of de-escalation, people in crisis and use of force. And we are accelerating the work to co-develop a legislative framework for First Nations policing as an essential service. Mr. Speaker, we're acting on these recommendations, and we're working to ensure that the RCMP is fully engaged in the reform.
The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
After years of obstruction, the Minister of Crown and Indigenous Affairs finally agreed to an independent review of the abuse of the rights of the St. Anne's residential school survivors. But she made no effort to talk to the survivors, and now we know why. Because the Minister is arbitrarily excluding many of the survivors, she's refusing to let the survivors know if their claims were breached by the government's actions, and she's refusing to provide access to the evidence that her officials suppressed. This minister has already spent over $3 million fighting these survivors. When is she going to end these toxic legal games and just do what is right by the survivors of St. Anne's Residential School? Do the right thing.
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the mistreatment of Indigenous children, including those who attended St. Anne's Indian Residential School, is a tragic and shameful part of Canada's history. To restore the confidence, rebuild trust, and maintain the integrity of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, Canada has approached the court to request an independent third-party review of the St. Anne's Indian Residential School independent assessment process claims, which were decided without the benefit of Canada's 2015 updated persons of interest reports. Throughout any review, Canada will fund health support measures for the survivors.
Honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Mr. Speaker, over the past year, Canadians and Canadian businesses have faced an unprecedented challenge. We have, as a country, gone through the worst health and economic crisis in over a century. Our government has been there for Canadians and Canadian businesses every step of the way. And with the vaccine rollout, there is now light at the end of the tunnel. Will the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance please update this House on when the government will present Budget 2021 and the government's vision for the future?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canada entered this global pandemic in a strong fiscal position, which allowed our government to provide unprecedented support to Canadians. We will continue to do whatever it takes to support Canadians and Canadian businesses, and we have a plan for jobs and robust growth. I'm pleased to announce that on April 19th at 4 p.m., the government will present Budget 2021. Pursuant to Standing Order 82.3, I ask that Standing Order 83.2, I ask that an order of the day be designated for that purpose. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Speaker, fruit and vegetable growers who are bringing international farm workers for the 2021 growing season are being asked to wait on phone lines with hundreds and thousands of other people to wait for a nurse that's contracted by the government, that is to supervise their COVID-19 test at day 10. But if they get through, once the test is complete, they're required to forward it to the lab by Purelator courier. So this just in, Mr. Speaker, Purelator does not serve many parts of rural Canada. And where it is available, they don't work on the weekends. So will this government give fruit and vegetable growers a workable solution for getting farm workers to work?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to reassure my colleague and all Canadian farmers that we are working really seriously to make sure that the procedure is safe for the temporary foreign workers, safe for Canadians. And yes, we know there's a challenge around day 10 test, but I can assure you that we are working on it. We have already put in place additional resources and a line that is specifically dedicated to foreign workers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, the government's hotel quarantine policy is not based on science and is hurting the global work of Canadian humanitarian organizations. These organizations must now pay for hotel stays when they bring their workers home or transfer them through Canada to other locations. Now, humanitarian workers need to be traveling to fight this virus abroad, and that is why Conservatives asked for an exemption for them a month ago. At the very least, will the government support an exemption to this policy for humanitarian workers so that NGOs can focus their resources where they are most needed?
Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We value tremendously the incredible work that humanitarian workers are doing on the front lines here in Canada and around the world. The policy that our government has put in place is designed to keep Canadians safe, which is why quarantine measures are very important. However, we stand by the important work that humanitarian workers are doing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Le député de Lévis.
Honourable member for Lévis-Daubignières. Mr. Speaker, thousands of Canadians are returning from Florida at the moment with their vaccination certificate in hand and a negative COVID-19 test. Mr. Speaker, will these Canadians be able to return directly to their homes for their 3-day stay without having to spend their quarantine in a hotel? The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, and first, let me remind Canadians now is not the time to travel internationally. It's very important that we have proper public health protocols at the international borders. We have some of the strongest measures in the world. It keeps our rate of importation extremely low. And Mr. Speaker, as returning Canadians arrive in Canada, they will be expected to follow the regulations in place for all returning travelers.
The Honourable Member for Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, last week, constituents of mine working in the pipeline repair and inspection services were detained upon arrival into Canada, despite having provided a travel letter and a government essential service workers permit to the CBSA agents. Workers that cross the border for essential work have been deemed essential for a reason. Mr. Speaker, why is this government causing quarantine chaos, locking them up in their COVID hotels, even when proper credentials were presented?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have taken the measures that are necessary to protect the health and safety of all Canadians. At the same time, we have introduced exemptions for workers, including essential workers, to ensure that we can keep our economy going. We will continue to apply those measures with great rigor so that we can both protect the health and safety of Canadians as well as meeting the needs of Canadians economically. Thank you.
L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On January 27th, the House of Commons unanimously called on the Minister of Immigration to grant citizenship to Raif Badawi. On February 16th, I wrote to the Minister to remind him of this. Well, it's now March 23rd, and I'm still waiting for an acknowledgement of receipt, but more importantly, Raif Badawi is still not a citizen. Yesterday, when I questioned the Minister, he told me that he would continue to work with all members of Parliament. Well, that's nice, Mr. Speaker, but to work together, first you have to be working. So, when will Raif Badawi get his citizenship? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I share my colleague's concern of Concerning Mr. Badawi's detention, we're very concerned about his safety. We are studying the requirements of the Citizenship Act, given that Mr. Badawi is not on Canadian soil. We are working closely with Global Affairs Canada on this issue, and we will continue to work with all parliamentarians in order to reunite Mr. Badawi with his family. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague, congratulate him on his improved French, by the way. I know that the Minister is in touch with Erwin Kotler, Raif Badawi's lawyer. Mr. Kotler is also a former Liberal Minister of Justice who has represented other political prisoners, such as Nelson Mandela, and I want to emphasize this because I think there should be no partisanship here. We're all here to help release a man who is being arbitrarily detained. Mr. Kotler has confirmed that the Minister of Immigration has the discretion to grant citizenship and that it would help Mr. Badawi's case. He could do so as early as this afternoon if he chooses to do so. So why doesn't he? The Honourable Minister. Once again, I want to thank my colleague for his question. As I have already said, I share his concerns around Mr. Badawi's safety. It's not a really easy issue. We do have to deal with it attentively. I'm very concerned by Mr. Badawi's security, and I will continue to work with all colleagues on this issue and continue to engage the community and the family of Mr. Badawi. And I'm going to be working very closely with the Minister of Foreign Affairs on this. Thank you.
Member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, small businesses have borne the brunt of the pandemic. 60,000 of them have failed. Nearly 20,000 are on the brink. Millions of jobs are at stake. Many need more loans to survive, and thousands can't qualify. But debt is no substitute for customers, and small business debt is threatening recovery. Uncertainty from this government's lack of a plan is killing small business jobs. Will this government table a plan so that small businesses will know when they can have their customers back?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I share the Honourable Member's concern about Canadian small businesses, and that is why I would like to urge him and all members opposite to join us in supporting Bill C-14. This is legislation that will help small businesses, and you don't need to listen to me. You can listen to Dan Kelly, who says, Bill C-14 has some important measures for small businesses. CFIB urges all parties to ensure this support is passed quickly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Well, Madam Speaker, last week at Finance Committee, Philip Cross from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute said there is nothing in Bill C-14 for economic recovery. This government has repeatedly said that programs like the HASCAP program and the RRF were the answer for businesses that have fallen through the cracks. But the criteria for these programs is virtually the same as the other programs that are failing to reach Canadians. The minister admitted at the Finance Committee that there's nothing in C-14 for businesses that have fallen through the cracks because they opened. When are they going to table a plan and do something about it?
Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I announced earlier today, we will be presenting our budget on April 19th. But I must take issue, Mr. Speaker, with the simply false notion that Bill C-14 does not include measures to support small businesses. It would provide the RDAs with an additional $206.7 million to replicate CEBA loan limits for gap-filling programs and RRF gap-filling capacity. C-14 also gives us the formal authority to provide rent support programs for rent payable. Many other important measures there, Mr. Speaker, and I hope all members of this House will support this essential legislation.
The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, recently it was announced that 800,000 taxpayers have been locked out of their CRA My accounts because their account information has been obtained by unauthorized third parties. Now, that is close to 1 million Canadians who have been locked out of their accounts, many of whom will rely on it to apply for their emergency benefits or file their taxes. While the CRA has suggested this is just precautionary, it should never have happened. Will the Minister ensure that Canadians are not paying the price for CRA's recklessness and make sure this never happens again?
Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, protecting Canadians' personal data is a priority for the Canada Revenue Agency. The people concerned by this issue will receive a notification that they need to reinitialize their username and password for their CRA account. This step was taken proactively and as a preventive measure, and let me be very clear, there has been no breach in the agency's system. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Mississauga East Cooksville.
Mr. Speaker, we know that Canada remains deeply concerned about the egregious human rights violations that are taking place in the Xinjiang region in China. We're particularly concerned by the reports of forced labor in the region and the ongoing repression and persecution of the Uyghurs. Yesterday, along with the US, the UK, the EU, Canada has announced targeted measures against Chinese officials who have been directly involved in these atrocities. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs update this House on Canada's most recent actions?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member from Mississauga East Cooksville and chair of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights for his work on this serious issue. More than ever, democratic countries must stand together to defend democracy and human rights. That is why yesterday we joined our allies in imposing sanctions on 4 individuals and an entity who have played a key role in the persecution of the Uyghurs. We will continue to call on China to stop the repression against the Uyghurs and to hold those responsible to account.
Honourable Member for Medicine Hat Carson Warner.
Mr. Speaker, pre-COVID, Canada's emergency management experts had a clear pandemic plan. However, this plan was trashed along with pandemic stockpiles and our early warning system. And now, Canadians are paying the price for this negligence with the Liberals' plan for the next election. Lockdowns and restrictions are supposed to be temporary to buy governments time to get appropriate measures like rapid testing and vaccines in place. So, where is this government's data-driven plan for a recovery, and why are Canadians being forced to endure perpetual restrictions while we wait for that plan?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as a member opposite knows, we have worked with scientists, public health leaders, and indeed provinces and territories every step of the way to respond to COVID-19, from the early days where we were supporting provinces and territories to acquire personal protective equipment and start up domestic manufacturing, to now where we are acquiring the vaccines, paying for them, and ensuring that provinces and territories have the systems to administer those vaccines. Mr. Speaker, we've delivered over 31 million rapid tests. We've ensured that provinces and territories have the money, the expertise, and the support they need to protect the health of the citizens that they are responsible for taking care of.
The Honourable Member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, families want to be able to visit their loved ones in long-term care homes. Grandmothers want to hug their children. People in Point Roberts simply want to be able to go and visit their doctor or their dentist. The government now has robust data on the efficacy of vaccines. When will they update their guidelines on what are appropriate activities for fully vaccinated individuals?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the member's interest in the data and science on vaccination. And she's right. What we do know is that vaccinations are indeed saving lives, and the data is accumulating that they are a very strong protection for the transmission, for the experience of getting very sick with COVID-19. Where the research is still evolving is the effect on transmission, and we will always listen to the advice of public health experts, scientists, indeed the leaders all across this country that are working so hard to balance the public health measures necessary to protect Canadians during this extremely delicate time.
The Honourable Member for Dauphin Swan River, Nipawa.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians want a government that works for them, but they don't have one. Seniors are being left behind, businesses have closed their doors, rural Canada is being ignored, and our vaccine rollout is amongst the worst. Instead of doing his job, this Prime Minister is more focused on keeping his job. Canadians don't want an early election. They want a future. Why is this Prime Minister more focused on his political future versus the future of Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr.
Mr. Speaker, I disagree entirely with my honorable colleague's assertion. Since day one of COVID, our government has put the well-being of Canadians at the heart of our response. And as the finance minister said today, we will be there every step of the way until we get out of COVID and build back better. As the Minister for Rural Economic Development, I'm proud that we are taking this opportunity in these difficult times to connect every Canadian to high-speed internet, a service that is essential. No government has done more, and to rural Canadians, we've got your back.
The Honourable Member for Brome-Missisquoi. Mr. Speaker, over the last year, Canadians have had to roll up their sleeves to deal with an unprecedented health and economic crisis. From the start of the pandemic, our government has been there to support Canadians, and we will be there for the recovery to build back better and create a stronger Canada. Could the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance please inform the House when the government will table the 2021 budget and our vision for the future? Thank you. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you for the question. Mr. Speaker, we entered this crisis in a strong fiscal position, which has allowed us to provide unprecedented support to Canadians during this pandemic. I am pleased to announce that on April 19th at 4 p.m., the government will table the 2021 budget. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
A recent CCPA report noted that because of high costs, there has been a substantial decline of 10% in childcare enrollment in most Canadian cities. It was most extreme in Ontario. Accessible and affordable childcare will play a vital role in rebuilding our economy and will be essential in helping parents get back to work. The Liberals supported our NDP motion to put $2 billion into childcare immediately, yet there's still no relief. Families are used to broken Liberal campaign promises. Is this just one more?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are committed and we understand the immense pressure that COVID-19 has put on Canadian families and particularly parents. We're committed to being there for parents throughout this crisis to ensure that they take care of themselves, their children, and their families. That's why we introduced a series of measures to help families through this pandemic. But we also introduced measures to help the childcare sector, and we're committed to, of course, continuing our investments, but also a more ambitious plan to ensure that each and every child in Canada has access to affordable and high-quality childcare from coast to coast to coast.
The Honourable Member for Brampton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, compared to other countries, only less than 10% of Canadians are vaccinated, and everyone is concerned. Can Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry explain that in spite of the rich resources available, why this government could not bring a proper plan for made in Canada vaccine instead of depending on others? Thank you, Minister. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, it's quite the opposite, actually. Within 12 days that the World Health Organization declared a pandemic, Mr. Speaker, we were already there with $200 million to support made in Canada vaccine and therapeutics, Mr. Speaker. And within 30 days, we added another $600 million. So in fact, Canadians should know that within a month, we had almost $1 billion, which was invested to make sure that Canadians can rely on safe and effective vaccines through procurement and to biomanufacturing in this country, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to invest to ensure the resiliency of Canadians and to protect their health and safety for the future.
And that's all the time we have for question period today. I believe we have the Honourable Member for Burnaby South rising on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise again today, Mr. Speaker, on another very urgent matter. There have been consultations with other parties, and if you seek it, I hope you will find consent for the following motion: that the House denounce the racism in the RCMP as found by the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission in a report that also revealed that the RCMP destroyed records of police communications from the night Colton Boushie was killed and condemn the cover-up by the RCMP.
All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. Agreed? The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those opposed to the motion will please say nay. Carried. No? Okay. Now we'll move on to the votes. Comme il est 3h09.
It being 3:09 p.m. Pursuant to order made on Monday, January 25th, 2021, the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion of Mr. Singh relating to the business of supply.
Members. Thank you, sir. C'était en place. La question est la suivante.
The question is the following one.
Seconded by Ms. Kwan, moved that given that, one, during the first wave, 82% of COVID deaths in Canada happened in long-term care, the highest proportion in the OECD. Deux, plus que 12,000 résidents.
Two, there have been over 12,000 long-term care resident and worker deaths in Canada.
No, okay. Au Canada, depuis le début de...
In Canada, since the beginning of the pandemic. Three,
and workers in for-profit long-term care homes have a higher risk of infection and death than those in non-profit homes. The House call upon the government to ensure that the national standard